On Friday of Holy Week, the Friday that has come to be known as Good Friday, Mark, having given us a day-by-day account of Jesus last week in and around Jerusalem, moves to a more detailed chronology. Friday's account is presented in 3-hour periods, from 6 to 9 in the morning, from 9 till noon, from noon till 3 o'clock, and from 3 o'clock to around 6 p.m. Very early the next morning, probably around daybreak, so say around 6 a.m. on Friday, Jesus, having been condemned to death by the Jewish authorities, is taken before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate to be tried. Jesus' hearing or trial before Pilate is, or rather should be, the ultimate coming up against the powers that be, the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of the world, God versus empire. But it's not what you might expect of such a coming together. You might have expected a fiery encounter. You might have expected the sparks to fly. You might have expected high drama. But it's not quite what we get. What we get is Jesus not really saying much, not really defending himself, not pushing his case or his claim. All Mark tells us is that Pilate asks Jesus if he is the King of the Jews, effectively the charge that was being made against him. And Jesus responding with, "You say I am." Further accusations follow from the Jewish leaders, to which Jesus offers no response. And Pilate is amazed. Perhaps at Jesus' unwillingness to defend himself, perhaps at Jesus' bravery, or his contempt, or his courage in refusing to respond to the representative of Caesar. Sometimes saying nothing is very powerful. Sometimes saying nothing is the most powerful thing we can do. After Pilate and the Jewish authorities have questioned Jesus, the people, the crowd, demand the release of a criminal and demand the crucifixion of Jesus. This crowd is not the same crowd, the same people who welcomed Jesus 5 days earlier. Those people who welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem hadn't turned against him. This was a hired mob. This was a renter crowd, if you like. Those who welcomed Jesus on Palm Sunday wouldn't have been allowed into this trial. This crowd, probably few in number, were manipulated and possibly paid by the authorities, by the chief priests. There's no hand washing by Pilate in Mark's account. Jesus is mocked and beaten and led out to be crucified. Given the focus there has been on Jesus' crucifixion, and particularly on his suffering, his shed blood, his broken body in art and literature down through the years, perhaps culminating in Mel Gibson's rather gruesome and frankly voyeuristic film, The Passion of the Christ, Mark says very little about Jesus' crucifixion and death. Mark simply says it was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. Mark's original readers would have known all about crucifixion. They wouldn't have needed the details spelling out for them. The agony and the suffering would, however, have been very real. Crucifixion was generally reserved for opponents of Rome, not for common criminals. It was designed to be painful, public, and a powerful deterrent. The bandits or robbers crucified alongside Jesus were, in reality, probably freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on your point of view, insurrectionists, enemies of the empire. Jesus was crucified as a rebel against Rome, a rebel against the empire, with the inscription King of the Jews written above him. Mark tells us that when it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. Possibly intended to be taken symbolically, possibly intended to convey the way in which evil was having its last say. Mark tells us that at 3 o'clock, having been on the cross for 6 hours, and just take a moment to let that sink in. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in Aramaic, my God, why have you forsaken me?" A quote from the Psalms. And with a loud cry took his last breath. End of story. But of course it wasn't, and it isn't. It looks like the end. It maybe feels like the end. And maybe we feel in the situation we find ourselves in like we are at an end. It's the end of the world as we know it, REM sang 30 odd years ago. Our world is changed and changing. But that doesn't mean it's the end, although it might be an end. It might be an end to many things that needed to end. To complete the quote from REM, it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Actually, it's not the end of Mark's account of Friday either. Mark says that when Jesus died, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. That being the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the place where the presence of God was said to dwell in the temple, from the rest of the temple. Maybe that curtain was literally torn in two as Jesus died, but more likely this symbolised the fact that Jesus' death opened up the way for us to God. No need for priests, no need for sacrifice. In the evening of that day, Mark says when the evening had come, so around 6 p.m. it would have been, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, asks for Jesus' body, prepares it for burial, and places it in a rock tomb. And so ends Good Friday. Thank you for listening. On Sunday, we'll conclude our review of Jesus' last week as seen through the eyes of Mark. For now, stay safe, stay well, and keep watch. As the saying goes, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming.